You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
You know, Rachel, you're right. This is Mike Lovett, and you are listening to And If Love Remains. And I am out of the studio. I'm what's that called? I'm on the road. I'm with my buddy Joe Wolverton. Excited to talk to him again today. We just had a discussion the other day. We're looking forward to that. As of today, that episode hasn't been posted, but you will see that soon, and you will probably have already listened to it before you get to this one. But I'm just excited to be back here and chat with you, Joey. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, brother. How are you doing? So you did get the link to it then?
I haven't seen it,
Okay.
but I haven't really checked yet. But we'll get that all straightened out. Anyway, I'm excited to talk to you again. As always, it's always a blessing to chat with you. And I think every conversation we have should be recorded.
Well, I've had so many ideas about, because I had a podcast for a while, the Teacher of Liberty podcast.
Right.
You can still find it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and whatnot. But it was always just, I don't know. It always seems so preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
So I've wanted to have the opportunity to just have sort of a freestyling, just top of the mind discussion. And that's what happens with you. We do have, I guess, a direction, a topic, but often it turns in, because I had a thought today, I'm like, I wonder what Mike's reading. Right? Like, know what we do.
Yeah.
And I would love to have a podcast where it's like, what are you reading? And just have people like call in. Like, you can't, I don't have the capacity for that. I don't even know how
Well,
to do that.
what we should do is maybe sometime do a live stream and have people, tell us.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
If I got on my Amargy group, if I got like 500 more followers, I got like so many followers. I don't know how, but if I got like 500 more on the Amargy group on YouTube, we could do live on YouTube.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Because that would be interesting to hear. And I'll tell you the two books I'm reading right now.
Okay.
Is the one I'm finishing up. Actually, I'm finishing both up. Is Scotland by Murray Piddock, which is a kind of a modern. It's an interesting book on the legacy of Scotland. And Murray is just we had him on recently. He's a great guest, and really loved having him on. And then the other book I'm finishing up is The White Pill by Michael Malice.
Oh yeah.
And that's a great book. It's fun.
Yeah. I don't read anything new. That's the thing, is because the things that I read, so like right now I'm reading The Peloponnesian War by Thucydides again. I'm reading Court Maxims by Algernon Sidney again. I'm reading The Ancient Regime by Alexis de Tocqueville again.
Yeah.
And what's the other thing? I always read the Bible, right? I always stay up on that. I'm trying to think of the other. Out of the Silent Planet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm rereading the science fiction trilogy by C.S. Lewis.
The Ransom trilogy.
Yeah. So I'm reading Out of the Silent. I'm like, I know, what is that book? Out of the Silent Planet.
I think that's maybe one of the most underrated of all of C.S. Lewis's writings. Is that trilogy?
I'm always shocked by how many people don't even know it exists.
Right.
Like, I'll have students that'll say, "Oh, I just love C.S. Lewis," and I'm like, "Have you read the science fiction trilogy?" Huh?
Yeah.
And when I show it to him, it's like,
it's so good. And it's funny. There's I remember. I'm trying to think who it was. It was somebody, and I'm going to. I'm gonna have to go back and remember now. But he was the one that really helped bring C.S. Lewis to America. The writings of C.S. Lewis. He's a Southern boy who went to go visit him and just ended up being kind of his curator, and ended up like just bringing all this stuff and Anyway, he tells a story of talking to C.S. Lewis, and C.S. Lewis asked him what his favorite book was, and he thought about it for a minute. And he says, "Well, I think your best book is Paralandra," and C.S. Lewis smiled and said, "I think that's my best book too, but I didn't ask you that. I asked you what was your favorite."
Oh, okay.
And he said, "Well, my favorite is oh my gosh, the third book in the trilogy,
That Hideous
That
Strength.
Hideous Strength." And he's like, and C.S. Lewis said, "Yeah, that's my favorite too."
Oh, wow.
And you can see that, like, it's you can tell it's both so powerful, but it's also just a romp.
Yeah, my favorite C.S. Lewis will forever be Screw Tape.
Yeah.
It exposed to me so much of my own weakness, and revealed that it was a concerted attack on my faith, and it helped me a lot because I thereby was made aware of some of the tactics used by the enemy. And so Screw Tape will forever be my favorite. No one believed this, but hand to heaven, Mike, I did not know who C.S. Lewis was until freshman year of college.
Oh, really?
Never heard of, I think I might have heard of the Chronicles of Narnia. I'm pretty sure I did.
Yeah.
But wouldn't have been able to identify the author. And then freshman year of college, a professor required that we read The Abolition of Man. And
have you read Michael Ward's? He wrote it's like a textbook on the abolition of man.
no.
I had him on like a year ago when he finished the book. And it is a great book because it goes through the abolition of man and really takes it as a like you could use it as a textbook for a class.
Right.
Gives a history, just a bunch of stuff. It was a really great scholarly book.
Well, I used to be really, really involved in, C.S. Lewis fan groups on the internet. Not now, but I did. And so I got to meet one time in Provo at a C.S. Lewis conference, if you can believe. They used to have a C.S. Lewis conference every year in Provo. And it was at the library. And I got to meet Doug Gresham.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so started emailing, if you can believe it, Doug Gresham, and asking him questions that I had about abolition of man, and still have those notes that Doug gave. He's a really sweet man, a really nice man, and so yeah, abolition of man. And I remember the funny thing was, so the professor, it was a required text, so I'd already bought it, right? And I showed up, but everything about college, no one would believe me. If we go back in time and both of us could, like a Christmas Carol style, the ghost of Christmas past could walk around with you and show you me as a freshman. You wouldn't believe it was me because, I was the first person in either side of my family to go to college. So
Yeah.
I had no idea what it was. I didn't understand when we got to class and the professor was asking about the homework, and I'm like, well, how can we have homework? And he's like, oh, it's been posted. And now this is the days before the internet. My freshman year was 87, 88. And he's like, well, it was posted down on the bulletin board. You should have. I'm like, really? And other classmates who, many of them legacies, been to BYU, and they were like, who is this redneck, this hillbilly? And so I really was in over my head. But I remember I bought the books, right? Not before, because I didn't know you were supposed to. I went to class, got the syllabus, bought the books. After I got the syllabus, everybody's like, where are your books? I'm like, how do I know? They're like, dude, you should have had these bought weeks ago. But I went to the bookstore, bought Abolition of Man, went to class. It was a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday class. Went to class on Wednesday, and we started with, and I was just like, yep, this is setting my path for life. Went to the bookstore and bought all the C.S. Lewis books.
Yeah.
Like not the fiction, not Narnia and not the science fiction trilogy, but they had, and you've probably seen the mass market paperbacks from the late 80s, early 90s. They all looked the same. And I bought everyone, Mere Christianity, Screw Tape, A Grief Observed, literally, the Four
Surprised
Loves,
by Joy.
Surprised by Joy,
Yeah.
all of them. I bought all of them and just devoured them.
Oh, wow.
And that man, as much as anyone that I don't know personally he definitely has, influenced me.
I remember when I first read The Great Divorce.
Ooh,
that
was
had
one
probably
of my favorite ones too.
Yeah, that had probably the biggest impact on me, because it was so I could just relate to that character. I could and it was such an interesting premise. I mean, everything about that book was just a wild ride. And how he described the angels and how everything in heaven was more real than real, and harder than hard, like everything about that. And then you'd have, and those of you, if you haven't read it, I mean, it's a series of little scenes that C.S. Lewis sets the scene. You get to this place and you see these scenes of angels interacting with these individuals that have been in hell, and the angels are trying to convince these people that they need to leave hell and follow them into heaven. And I mean, every aspect of human nature. In fact, I think my favorite little scene was an angel comes down and is talking to one of these people in hell, and he's like, yeah, you should come. It's a wonderful place. You're going to love it. And all of a sudden the person recognizes the angel, and he's like, wait, I know who you are. You're, Joe. And he's like, yeah. He's like, aren't you a murderer? Didn't you kill somebody? And he's like, well, yeah, but that's in the past. That's like, what are you talking about? That's so yesterday. What do you even, so what? He's like, well, what are you doing? Why am I in hell and you're in? And so you start to see like what's really holding people back is their soul, is their spirit. It's the thing. It's like, it's their pride that's holding them back and not being able to fully embrace the gospel and the grace of Jesus Christ. And how, and like, cause it's all of sin can just be gone if we just let it,
Yeah, I remember that when I read Great Divorce, which was, I think, the second one that I read after Abolition of Man was Great Divorce. I remember being struck by the whole concept of not realizing that you're dead.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me, and I thought, how would you know? I mean, unless someone came up, even if someone came up to you, if you believe, as do I, that your spirit at least, mostly resembles you as a physical being.
Right.
And if you can see, if assuming you can see this dimension when you're dead, which I don't know that you can, it would make it easier if you couldn't.
Right.
To accept that you're dead. Because if you could still see everything, and I'm just sitting here going, and someone says, welcome to the other side. I'm like, other side of what? Because I don't know. Is everyone dressed in white? You always see that, right? Everyone's dressed in like a muumuu. Like everyone's wearing a white muumuu. Like, do you have to send in do you have to wear your regular clothes until someone gets your order? Or what? Is it like, I'm serious. It's like, are you wearing your, like, make sure you're wearing nice clothes until your muumuu comes in or something. It's like your spirit muumuu. It's like, how does that work? But I remember,
hilarious.
I remember when my father died, I was standing there in the emergency room, and they wheeled him into this extra little room because he'd passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. And I'm standing there with my mom and my sister, because it was right after Christmas, and we were there for Christmas break. And, I'm standing there, and it's like, what's my dad seeing right now?
Yeah.
And honestly, it was like the Great Divorce came into my mind.
Yeah.
Like what's the process by which one comes to realize one is dead? And then that's got to play with your mind about what dead means.
Right.
Because you know, you might be dead right now, as far as your progress is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
You could be alive and be dead, if you know what I mean, right? You're not
Oh,
moving toward.
we use those terms all the time.
Right.
She looks dead inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, she has dead eyes. Is the spark of life returned? You know, like those terminologies. Like we
I know that
relate to them.
there's. If I could recommend another, no, this isn't C.S. Lewis, but a book that I just finished reading again, and I read a different translation this time. Seneca on the shortness of life.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm really stoical in my personal philosophy, very stoical. And Seneca is a stoic philosopher, and his On the Shortness of Life, I just reread in a new translation, and it's really good about this. It's like so many people are dead years before they die because they don't embrace life. They don't recognize opportunities. They stay lost in this maze of their sins, of their misdeeds, of their ignorance. And there is an enemy, an actual enemy, someone who knows you, who it is his goal, it is his work and glory to keep you in that maze,
Right.
surrounded constantly by, what's that the Savior said? Thy walls are always before me. Well, this enemy of our salvation, of our happiness, this enemy wants us to be in this maze where all we see are walls that were formed of our sins, our ignorance, our selfishness, and never to realize that you can step out of this maze anytime you want.
Yeah.
And keep it in your head. It's very much a C.S. Lewis screw tape kind of thing.
Yeah.
Keep it in the patient's head that there is an exit, but he has to walk through the maze to find it.
Right.
Whereas Jesus says, I will pluck you out of the maze. Wherever you find yourself, the minute you want out, you let me know, I will pluck you out. Whereas the enemy says, no. You can get out of the maze, but you have to find the exit. And so you continually try to find the exit, and you're never going to find it.
Yeah. And that's
Seneca. Seneca on the shortness of life.
I love that. And I think that's a powerful trap because it makes sense. And Jesus's way doesn't make sense.
Well,
right?
Neither does, hey, I'm blind. Okay, I'm going to heal your blindness by putting mud in your eyes.
Right. Well, and think of his parables. The second you start talking about, burying talents the second you start talking about all these strange events that we can't understand, like you're probably talking about the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, the paradoxes, right?
Yeah.
The paradoxes, there are so many paradoxes in the gospel, but it's like you do this and that will happen. It doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of supposed to teach you that up is down and down is up.
Yeah. Yeah.
As far as this world is concerned. Because he says outright, doesn't he? If they love you in the world, then you obviously aren't following me. Mm-hmm. Because if you were, they would hate you.
Because they hate me.
Right.
Yeah.
And so doesn't that become a barometer?
Right.
That becomes a barometer. If you're popular, there's probably a problem. Right? And it becomes a sliding scale.
At best, it's something you have to overcome.
Right. I mean, can you be popular and be pious in the good sense? Can you be popular with the world and yet what would God say? Well pleased. Can you be pleasing to God and pleasing to the world?
I don't know.
That's something. Who is it that says that? Let me think. From the Founder's Recipe list, he's like, you can tell how righteous of a person you are by testing how the world responds. It's Plutarch. He's like, the more the more virtuous you become, the less you will be able to tolerate the world. And so you can tell, the more you can tolerate the world, the less virtue. And, I guess step one is being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
How much of the world do I tolerate? Because it's probably a lot, man. And that's Plutarch's thing. It's, again, Plutarch is giving this scale of, in so much as you tolerate the world, then that's how to measure your virtue. Because a virtuous person would not be able to tolerate the world.
Right.
Or at least not much of it. And you would spend your time doing things that are only available in the world, but that keep your eyes on the true mark.
Yeah.
Not on, is this, I mean, the deal. And I've lived that life as well, where it's like, sometimes you do something, I hope this makes me famous, or I hope this makes me money.
Right.
Instead of saying, I hope I feel closer to God after I do this.
That's the trick is man, like, chasing after things of the world is so seductive.
Literally seductive.
Right?
Literally seductive. I told someone that, who did I tell that? I can't remember who I was telling about how seduce is the Latin.
That was me yesterday.
No, I know you, but there was some after you. Someone,
I was blown away.
After you, someone was saying, I was like, seduce is the antonym of educate in Latin, anyway.
Yeah, that and
that's
which tells you, like, if you're an educated person, by definition, you should be able to discern the difference. And if you're not, again, there's another barometer. Like, if you're being seduced by the wealth and riches and the the trappings of the world, then there's you have to think of yourself as being seduced. Following the sirens.
Yeah, and right, and those who will call to you and say, you've accomplished so much, you don't need to climb any higher on that mountain, because right now, at the level you are, I can offer you riches, I can offer you fame. I don't want you climbing closer to the pinnacle of that mountain, because at the pinnacle of that mountain, there's only room for two, you and God. I mean, that's, the pyramids are fake mountains. When they built the pyramids, the idea was, and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the idea was, and in the Old Testament, right? And why do they climb a mountain? Well, the idea is, first of all, everything looks different. Your perspective is different.
Right.
Second, at the peak, there isn't room for a lot of people there. It's you and the deity. And those who would seduce you would say, there's more company down here. You're accepted. Look how people look up to you.
Or how about this? I mean, if we could take the screw tape letter tactic of, you're going to be more influential and help more people if you stay down here. I mean, if you go up there, who are you going to be helping up the ladder? That does nobody any good.
Oh, right. You selfishly want to go to the top of the mountain, whereas you could stay here and help people get to this level, which, look around, is a pretty respectable level.
Right.
If you keep climbing that mountain, it's going to be you and God. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Right? You want to help people get a better view? I agree. They need to have a better perspective. And look where you are. Look down. Look how far you've come. We'll help people get to this level.
Talking about the need for discernment when those kind of arguments come, because that the enemy is fighting hard with those arguments.
I don't think you need discernment. That's one of those things I will dismiss thee without further argument.
No, I understand that, but you have to. I guess the discernment has to be that to recognize
that's a satanic
right that what it is
influence.
where it's coming from because I mean maybe this is speaking to me to my personalities. I could see myself justifying
Justifying staying down at the certain, and they would never use that.
right.
He would say, "Look how far you." That's the thing, the enemy of our
Look how much
of our happiness. Yeah,
Right.
look how far you've come. Look what you've achieved.
Yeah.
Look what people think of you. If you go any higher, first of all, there's no guarantee that God's at the top.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that's true, mate? You can look around and see the influence that you've had. You can look around and see the people you've helped. That's a good thing. Stay here. Keep doing this. Because as you climb up, not only are you, maybe you get up there.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous. And, yeah. And when you get up there, what if you can't come down?
right.
And so there are many seductive and persuasive arguments.
And that's where like a book like The Screwtape Letters is so powerful because it really, I mean, that C.S. Lewis was a prophet in being able to see how the enemy works,
right.
and
But what did it come from? It came from his own honesty,
right,
with how the devil worked with him.
well, because he was an atheist, he was a strong atheist for years, and there's that famous, what does he say, where I think he was walking with his brother, and they and this is like the he called himself the most reluctant convert, but if you actually hear the story of where that conversion takes place, obviously it happened over time, but he does say, like, when did it happen? I was having a conversation, I think it was his brother, may have been a friend, walking down this avenue. At the beginning of the conversation, I wasn't an atheist. At the end of the conversation, I was a Christian. And sometimes it's just like that. But being able to understand all of those arguments and how, how the enemy works, that's a gift that he's given us.
Yeah, one of the things, speaking that you just said, who was C.S. Lewis walking with? I mean, if it was his brother or J.R. Tolkien, for that matter. But, at the beginning of the walk, he was an atheist. At the end, he was a Christian. And it made me think of this concept that Seneca speaks of in his book. He's like, if someone came up to you, and I'm just going to make it in modern terms. He's like, and read it yourself. Please do. It's not even long. Gosh, it's not. I bet it's not 50 pages.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, on the shortness of life, or sometimes called the brevity of life. But anyway, Seneca on the shortness of life. He says, and again, I'm paraphrasing in modern terms. He's like, if someone came up to you and asked you right now for $1 million, you wouldn't even think of it. You'd say no. Right? If a stranger came up to you and said, and let's assume you have $1 million to give away.
Mm-hmm.
And if a stranger came up to you and said, can I have $1 million? You say no. If a stranger came up to you and started talking to you and took an hour of your time, you wouldn't think twice about it. But guess what? You can make another $1 million. You can't make another hour.
Right.
He's like, time is much more valuable than money, and we treat it like it doesn't matter. We give it away for the most frivolous reasons. And you would never, he's like, people keep, as Seneca says, people keep account books of every penny.
Right.
But you can't, we have a thing that's like, oh, I just vegged for 8 hours. What?
Right.
But if someone said, oh, give me $1,000, you'd be like, no way. But if someone says, spend the next 8 hours binge watching a show, you're like, yeah, that sounds awesome.
Right.
And you'll never get that time back.
That's such, Jordan Peterson makes a similar point where he says, we see all these old people and that they're rich. He said, they're rich, but they're old. Mm-hmm. Like, what would you
That's
rather?
Right out of Seneca.
Yeah. What would you rather give them? Would you rather have, be rich, or would you rather have your youth?
Seneca even says, though, that some of those people wouldn't even take their youth. They're so, and he says, you can see this is true because what happens on people's deathbeds, they plead with God for more time. He's like, shouldn't you just have left it all in the field, and when it's your time to go, you just slip, slip away into
when you
eternity?
realize like it's all staying here, and everything you've worked for is staying here, and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was the point of the life?
Well, that's like in the Iliad. One of my favorite lessons from the Iliad is when Achilles' mom comes to him and says, you can have a long, anonymous life as a farmer back home, or you can die young and your name will never be forgotten. And Achilles, of course, obviously, we're talking about him.
Right.
We're still talking about the Iliad, I don't know.
Well, that's that,
so that's the question. But which would you choose? I don't, and this is going to sound hilarious. And you guys were talking about it on your show with Steven, I think, about you guys listen to KMVP as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Wolf, you're talking about Wolf.
Yeah, Ron Wolfley.
Ron Wolfley. And so they were talking the other day. They were saying, would you rather be, how did they put it? You probably listening to the show at the same time. They said,
possibly.
Would you rather someone gave you, I can't remember what he says, like 5, if someone gave you years or someone gave you money or whatever it was, you could either be, that's what it was. You could Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Like you could be MJ at his prime.
Right.
Right? And die, or you could be, MJ now.
Right.
And he's like, and anyway, that goes back to it, like how, but I'm telling you, it changes so many things, man. And reading the best books changes your life.
Where do you think, if you're a modernist, you believe, there was no wisdom, until the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, if you're a Christian, you don't believe there's any wisdom until Christ.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Jew, you don't believe any wisdom, before Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So, and obviously, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, because obviously you're talking about Seneca, you're talking about like these
Plutarch,
ancient,
Homer,
these people that
mm-hmm.
and had no relation to the God of Abraham,
Right.
Isaac, and Jacob.
Right.
What where is your feeling on how they gathered their wisdom? They had their religions,
Mm-hmm.
they had their ceremonies, they had their, but did that just all come from their mind?
I think it came from God. I don't think God says, you're not in the right club, so you don't get any of my wisdom.
Right.
And I think all of them, at least, as far as we know, they had some desire for wisdom. And I think ask and ye shall receive. Did they ask the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No. But did they, I tell you one thing, if you want to read something that'll tear your heart out and reveal to you the type of men that these were, read Plutarch's letter to his wife upon the death of his daughter. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I held a summer class many years ago, a Founder's Recipe summer class.
Yeah.
And one of the people, and it was adults only. And one of the people, we randomly selected someone for every, and this lady got Plutarch. And she's like, what should I read? And I'm like, well, and this is before the Founder's Recipe book was out. And so I said, you could read the biographies, the so-called parallel lives. You could do that, and it's awesome. There's great lessons. I'm like, but he wrote a heck of a lot of stuff that you can only find in facsimile. I'm like, what if I give you this? And so she ended up reading that, and she ended up reading the letter to his wife upon the death of his daughter. And so every week, everybody had to share something they read. And she's like, I want to read this letter that he wrote to his wife. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And he refers to God. He refers to being with her again in the eternities. Now, that wasn't something that was particularly a part of his theology. not in the way he talks about it. So to me, it reveals not only the character of Plutarch, for example, but it reveals that, I don't get to decide what wisdom and insight that God dispenses to his children, because I read Seneca, I read all of these guys, right? All of these ancients, Cicero, Tacitus. I'm like, you just read them and you just feel so uplifted.
Yeah.
And I'm like, things of the Spirit are comprehended by the Spirit.
And one of the aspects I think that where wisdom, this kind of like real deep wisdom and something that's really missing in modern thought, is it's all grounded in the real. Like it's grounded in, they talk about God, but we're talking about life and death, builders, people who lived on farms, people like these weren't people that drove Teslas and had every want they ever desired, within a Uber driver phone call away. And there's something about like the being that close to the land, being that close to life and death, that close to the real. I think that tempers or frames any kind of wisdom. And so when you have modern thought that is void of that, it's meaningless. It goes into, I'm thinking of the postmodern thinkers and things where all of a sudden any thing can be interpreted as anything. And when you're at that point, it's like you've killed off not just philosophy, but you've killed off wisdom. You've killed off God.
Well,
Nietzsche, the death of God. It's
philosophy, right? The love of wisdom,
right? And if wisdom isn't grounded in the real, like that's what happens.
Well, and that's a lot. I teach in my Western civilization class that I'm teaching right now. One of the things that separated Sparta and Athens, one of the many things is, Athens' wealth brought them the concept of leisure, and that leisure time allowed them to say, I wonder why I'm here. What is justice? What is truth? Whereas the Spartan didn't have time and didn't really care, because that's not going to help you grow your crops. That's not going to help you tend to your sheep or goats. That's not going to help you. And one of the books that, oh my goodness, if I know I've recommended so many books already, but Hesiod, Works and Days. Dude, do yourself a solid. Read Hesiod's Works and Days. Again, it's probably 60 pages. It's the earliest Greek manuscript that we have, that's all together like that. And I estimate it's around 600 BC.
Okay.
And what's his name? Who is it? What's his name? That historian that called that the axial year. He's like, do you ever notice that he's an old German historian. He's like, did you ever notice that a lot of stuff happened in 600 BC? He's like, he calls it the axial age or the axial year. He's like,
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, he's like, right around. I have a book and I can't remember what he calls it, but I think you might call it the axial age. He's like, there's so many things. But anyway,
and there are a lot of things that are going on.
There are a lot of things. Buddha, there's a lot of things.
Yeah,
you could look up. But anyway, in Works and Days, what essentially happens? This kid's like, I'm gonna go to Athens and I'm gonna be important and all of this. I'm gonna live the life of a big city kid, and Hesiod's like, okay, but let me explain to you some of the things that you don't know because you're not paying attention to where you are. And he recommends essentially staying on the farm, and he's like, your behavior here, reveals that you've not learned lessons that could serve you well in Athens. There's several things we get from that book that people don't recognize. One of the things we get is the saying, make hay while the sun shines.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's from Hesiod, because he tells, I think it's his nephew or something. He complains that, I don't have enough hay for my animal. He's like, because you didn't make hay while the sun shone. You could have done that, but you just waited and waited. It started raining. You can't do it. Right? And Hesiod Works in Days is one of those books that reminds you of why Jefferson said farmers are the most virtuous and the most able to maintain self-government. Because as you rightly said, as a farmer, you can do everything right, and God doesn't send rain, and it's famine.
Yep.
You can literally have the best seeds, the best process for planting, the best soil. You can do everything right, the best climate. You can literally do everything right, and if it doesn't rain, ni modo, as the Spanish say, right? It's not going to matter.
Right.
So that makes you close, that forces you in a way to be close to God and say, not only say, please make it rain, but if it doesn't rain, I'll still serve you.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful stuff. Yeah.
And that's, these messages you can get from the Bible. You can. But I'm one of those people that believe bring all truth unto Zion and let all truth be encompassed in one great whole. And I think there's and that's kind of my literal reason for living. I think one of the reasons I was sent to earth was to expose people to these authors that have been forgotten, and I don't mean that in a haughty way. Like, there are other people who know about them, but I think that, it's like that parable of the olive tree in Jacob 5, where he says that the tops have outgrown the roots. Mm-hmm. And I often think, because just yesterday, somebody asked me, why don't you sell merch, man? You should sell merch. Like, those Factious and Discontented t-shirts were awesome. You should sell merch. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm not falling into that trap again. You should sell merch. You should do this. You should do that. And all of these things that I used to think, yeah. And then I remembered that's the tops outgrowing the roots. My purpose here is to share the writings, the wisdom from these forgotten authors, and get those messages out there and have a hope that we can use the past as prelude.
Yeah.
But, because when I tell people, it's so funny because I don't know why people like to pretend that they've read things that they haven't. I understand that there's some sort of maybe stigma of ignorance, but I think the stigma of ignorance is worse than being voluntarily ignorant.
Yeah.
Right? Don't be we're all involuntarily ignorant in many things. Right? We're involuntary. There are things that aren't within the sphere of our understanding because of whatever, geography or language, physical or mental shortcomings. But don't be voluntarily ignorant.
Right.
And so when you say, I'm just a history buff, and all you've read are popular histories, come on. Why drink downstream, man? That's the saying, right? The saying that I drilled into my students' head. Don't drink downstream. You go downstream. And, people aren't raised out in the country anymore. I
don't know what that means.
Nor was I. In fairness, my sister's probably listening, and she's like, you weren't raised in the country. But I was raised by people who were raised in the country. And we would go visit, and you see that when the spring comes out of the ground, it's like, oh, my goodness, it's cold. It's clear. You can just stick your mouth down there. You follow that spring downstream, and it's like, oh, I wouldn't drink that for $1 billion.
Right.
Right? Because people have walked through it, and trash has been thrown in it, and animals have done who knows what. And it's like, so popular histories are like drinking downstream. Yeah, it's wet. It's it could be classified as water. But if you drink from the stream, you're like, oh, I'm never going back downstream again.
Which, you know, I think people who are turned off by history maybe haven't experienced that cold clearness.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people always say, and people think I'm being falsely modest when I'm like, oh, it's not me, it's the message, and it really is. It's like no one gives the telescope credit for discovering planets.
Right.
Right? It's Galileo. Well, I'm the telescope, and I'm just, and the kids are Galileo,
but
or the kids are the adults, or whomever discovers these things. I'm like, that's all I want to be, man, is a simple telescope.
No, I hear you, and I appreciate you saying that, but I feel it necessary to point out that if you were just any telescope, like we could all look at the same moon and get the same thing. But if you're looking at a telescope, and I don't know where I'm going here, but my point is,
no, I get what
the
you're
stuff,
saying.
the stuff,
really, yeah.
the stuff that you're exposing people to has been hidden for so long, you know, purposefully, just because of time. Like, this stuff is really important, and it is, and it needs to be resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
and if you're the guy to do that, you know, to make that happen, man, then that's a blessing to us all.
Well, to me as well, you know, you know, I think of one of my heroes, Donald Robertson. Nobody knows who that is. Like, literally nobody knows who that is. And I'm sure he's fine with that. But he was, you know, the teacher, a Scotsman, a young Scotsman. You think of it, you know, think of these people, you think of them as old, and he's like 32. A young Scotsman who was the tutor, the teacher of James Madison, John Taylor of Caroline, people like that. And, you know, I wrote a biography of James Madison, and I'm working on the second edition of it. But I wrote a biography of James Madison. James Madison said, everything I have achieved in life, I owe largely to that man. Now, you would think if there was someone that made James Madison who he was, you'd know who he was. Nobody knows who he is. There's not the Wikipedia, I'm writing it, and it's been rejected several times.
Really?
Yeah. By Wikipedia. There's a Kim Kardashian entry that goes on for pages and pages. I tried to do a simple Donald Robertson page, and they're like, like, wow. You know, and so someday, inshallah, there'll be a page for Donald Robertson. But I know he's on the other side going, Joey, come on, I don't need that, man. And I think you do. And it's like one of those things where they don't know where his school was exactly. And I'm like, I want people to know. And I know he's saying, dude, spend your time talking about the things I talked about rather than talking about me. And that's why he's Donald Robertson.
Right. Which is why all the more reason we should, you know, say this is an example of you know, of how we should be, that humble. I think any kind of person that can magnify the truth, you know, becomes a small p prophet. Like, if you can magnify the truth and you can, like, bring that to light to somebody, right. and I mean, that's life changing kind of. I know times in my life when I've had paradigm shifts, and I could point to specific people, you being one of them, other people that you know, that have really shaped my life, and you know, it's like what Jim Rohn once said, you know, if you want to change somebody's life, hand them a book, you know, and you just change somebody's life, and you don't know which book that will be. Right. But I think, it's, man, it just, I, especially today, you know, I think about the importance of how education has become a seduction. It is no longer education. How we're being taught is insanely bad. I don't even know another word for it. It's terrible.
Well, it's certainly evil. And something you learn in Screw Tape Letters and you learn through life is not all people who do evil know they're doing evil.
Right.
So it might not be accounted to them for sin, but they're still doing evil.
Yeah.
And so people used to say that about when I taught in brick and mortar schools. They're like, oh, how can that teacher be doing? I'm like, she thinks she's doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't know she's seducing, not in the physical way,
Right,
but in the educational way. She doesn't know that she's doing it.
Participating in the opposite of education.
Yeah. And so it's like, I don't know. I think it's such
you can have grace for that, but at the same time, you have to recognize.
There is some grace, Mike, but there's also accountability,
right?
And because
it's that willful ignorance that you talked about.
Yeah, I would see some of these teachers. It's like I would see them, for example, in their classroom, and I'd just pass by and say, "Oh, what you got going on?" Like, "Oh, I'm pulling up YouTube videos to watch on whatever," and they would just literally sit there at their desk on their phone while the kids watched videos on the screen on YouTube. And I'm like, come on now. Come on. You can't think that that's teaching. Right. You cannot really think that. And then I would see people, they're just like, I'm like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm printing off this thing I saw online to give to my kids so they can do it. So that they don't have to stand there and teach it. And I remember, gosh, I would feel so self-conscious. I would feel so guilty because history, that would be so easy. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, yeah, we're going to watch a video about, I don't know, the War for Independence. You know how many videos are, I'm going to watch a video about World War II. Just turn on the History Channel, like literally, history makes that so easy.
Yeah.
But I would always be like, man, what if there's, I owe an obligation to these parents who are allowing me to stand proxy in loco parentis.
Right.
And
it would be one thing, like, if those videos, like, taught the truth.
But, yeah, and just, like, I love, the whole Richard Price thing about education is supposed to be for the unfolding of the mind and to give it its proper direction and force and to show these kids the power of their mind, the power of words, and I took that very seriously. I still do. It's like when I teach today, it's like I want your mind to be just blown. I used to tell that whenever, so when I taught in brick and mortar school, they would require us to put what you call it, a supply list. Like, these are the things you must have for Joey's class, Dr. Wolverton's class.
Okay, right.
And so, because they would have the parents supply them. And I remember one of the things I would always put on there is Clorox wipes. And so the kids would bring in, they're like, it's odd, but maybe you were cleaning the desks, which they actually were required to do. But I remember sometimes the parents or the kids, they would come in and because there would be like meet the teacher night before school started, a few days or a week before school started. And sometimes you'd have the parents, oh, can I ask why Clorox wipes are on your supply list? I'm like, oh, because I'm going to blow their minds and we need the Clorox wipes to wipe the brain off the wall. And some parents would do like you and they would laugh and some parents would be like, what? And I'd be like, yeah, we're every day, if I don't have brain matter splattered on the wall, I haven't done my job. Because I want these kids, and by the end of it, by the end of the 4 years, I want them to be able to do that to other people.
Yeah.
I remember there was a kid that was so quiet, literally probably said 5 words all year. And one year I was just walking around, just around the classroom. They were doing their reading from their different Founder's Recipe guys. And I asked him, like, so you like he had Tacitus. And I'm like, you like Tacitus? He's like, oh my gosh, it's so good. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's one of my favorites too. He's like, I just love it so much. There's so much good in it. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, yeah, I shared it with my parents. I'm like, oh, that's really good, man. And his mom emailed me and said, I just wanted you to know that, this Tacitus, he did a whole thing about it for, family night. And like did a presentation for family. And that wasn't homework.
Right.
Because I never, and that was the funny thing. It's like the administration, why don't you give homework? I'm like, because they will choose to do it at home.
Yeah.
And if I say you have to do it, everybody rebels. And if I say, I just want to expose you to this stuff, and then their parents are like, my son gave a whole presentation on Tacitus. What if I'd have signed that? He wouldn't have done it.
You wouldn't have done it. Yeah. Yeah, that's and so as somebody who you've worked in, you've mentioned brick and mortar schools. You've also worked as as tutors and for kids in homeschool situations. You've created classes for people to purchase. You've done a lot of things. I want to ask you, because kids come from all shapes and sizes. Their intellect, their passions, all of those things are different, whether they go to school or whether they're homeschooled. Like, I don't think on a fundamental, they're different all the way around. So you can't like make a general judgment on certain things. But what excites you? And we've talked a little bit about this, so I think I know the answer, but I really want people to understand what excites you, or why do you think the homeschool environment, the method, like why do you feel that's a superior method to a traditional even a charter or private school in many cases?
Because it's natural. Everything natural is better.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have any problem. Oh, organic is better. I only eat organic food, but I send my kids to high fructose corn syrup schools. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, natural's better, organic is better, except when it comes to the education of your children. You send them to strangers. So why is homeschool better? Because it's natural, it's real. It's not artificial.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, no parent of any of my kids that I taught in brick and mortar schools could have told me, who had the idea? Why do we sit in rows? Do you do that at home? No, of course not.
Right.
Do you ring a bell and your kids do you make sure lessons that you're teaching your kid only last an hour? Right? Do you teach the same lesson to all of your children if they're the same age? Do you do any of these things? Do you force them to walk down one side of the hall and the other side of the hall? Do you punish them for asking you questions? All of these things. Do you require them to take tests on the lessons that you've taught them? No. So none of the parents ever said, because why? Because all of us went through it. So it's just normal now. It's de rigueur. It's like, yeah, okay, that's what we do. But why do we do it?
Mm-hmm.
We do it because people decided, hey, we need good little soldiers and we need good little taxpayers. And the way to do that is to create this uniformity and they literally said, Mike.
I was gonna say you're saying it almost as if it was like a oh, we need this. No, this is literally what.
No, this is
wanted.
Literally what they said. And so they said, what's the Prussian model? So Prussia being one of the kingdoms of Germany. The Prussian model produces these factory workers, produces these soldiers, creates uniformity. So they literally went over to Prussia to study the model in the 1870s and 80s and said, whoa.
These are people like Dewey, like people like
Horace
Mann. Yeah.
John Dewey, Horace Mann. They went over and said, this worked. They brought it back and instituted it slowly. But what did they do? They made the great the unholy alliance with government. Every one of the founding fathers was homeschooled.
Right.
Every last one of them. And if you would have gone to Nellie Madison, James Madison's mom, said, "Hey, Nellie, here's what we're going to do. We need to take James and we need to give him to a stranger to teach. We're going to do that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 13 years. We're going to go ahead and need you to do that." She would have shot you before you left the house.
Yeah.
She would have gotten the gun down and blown your head off.
Right.
But today it's like, oh, it's so good. My kid is educated. Your kid isn't educated. Your kid is learning things you wish he didn't learn. Your kid is around people that you wouldn't let them hang out with outside of school. Literally. I don't want you hanging around Tommy that you're friends with at school. You can't bring him into the house. Why? I don't like the way he acts. But in the morning, I'm going to drop you off and let you spend 8 hours with him. And we're going to do that 5 days a week.
Right.
For the next 13 years.
And it's the same concept as prisoners. Like you don't put you put prisoners in prison, they don't come out better people.
I have a story about that. It's like when I was a lawyer, I didn't do criminal law. For like 3 months I did, because in our firm you had to do a little bit of everything. And I did criminal law for 3 months, and I would go to prison to visit this guy who was in prison, big boy prison, not jail. Went to prison. This guy, he's like, please, please get me out. Please get me out. Please get me out. And I went to visit him, first 2 weeks. Please get me out. Please get me out. Please get me out. 2 months later, you wouldn't recognize him.
Yeah.
2 months later, foul mouth. He was smoking. Who knows what? He had tattoo. You wouldn't recognize him. And, this happens in schools. I have so many times parents are like, oh, I would never let my son hang out with Tommy. He's a reprobate, and he smokes, and he sleeps around, and he watches pornography, and he cusses. I would never let him hang out with him except 8 hours a day at school.
Yeah.
5 days a week.
Where
you have at least at your house, you could watch. At school, it's crazy, Mike. There were parents who would hear about the lessons, the classes that I was teaching at school, and they'd be like, they would email me, "Can I come hear your lecture on blah, blah, blah?" Of course. "Can I come sit in your class? I want to learn about the Constitution." Of course. I would say, "Yes, come on." And then I would get calls from the office. "You can't have parents coming into your classroom." I remember sneaking a guy in and getting in so much trouble. And he was a parent of one of the kids. And he just wanted to see our debate on the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
That's all he wanted to do, man. He just wanted to see his kid. Because I did that. I would tell parents, like, "Dude, your kid kills in these debates." And they'd be like, "He never talks at home." I'm like, "Well, he shreds it in this classroom." So they'd want to come see it. I got in so much trouble because, man, you don't want those people seeing what you're doing with their kids.
Right.
You don't want to see that, that science teacher that your, tax money is paying $58,000 a year. You don't want to see her sitting there on her phone while the kids watch a YouTube video.
Right.
Couldn't you do that?
Well, and I think
and have it in a place where if we're going to look at it from a spiritual angle, theoretically, you have the spirit in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And, that's a benefit to learning.
Yeah, for sure.
In your home, you can say, "We don't use it." Do you know how many times, Mike, and I taught, quote unquote, good kids.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many times I heard them talking about things they should not be talking about? And I would call them on it. I'd say, "Guys, come on, man. That's the stuff they do at schools in Babylon. That's not how we handle our business."
Right.
But there's, you have little Tommy who has never heard those things before. All of a sudden, he's laughing at them.
Mm-hmm.
It's that Alexander Pope,
Well, and yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? That Alexander Pope?
No.
I'll pull it up real quick so I don't.
I was gonna
paraphrase
say
it.
while you're pulling that up, like, and that's part of the, like you might say. I think people might think, oh, that's part of the, that's just a quirk in the system. No, that's a feature, that's a benefit. That's what they're trying. They're trying to pull away the family, and they're so people. They and I know this. I mean, I went to school. I know how I felt about my family and my parents when I went to school versus, versus my kids. And there was one of the proudest things I am about, my children who we homeschooled, is that they have a deep affection towards each other. That they're more loyal to each other than to any friend or anybody outside the family. And that goes back to that's natural. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, if you start making, Mike, logical analogies to sending your kids to a proxy for their education, you get into some weeds real quick that people don't like talking about.
Yeah.
So here's this Alexander Pope. So he's one of the men most often quoted by the founding generation. And this is the quotation that you reminded me of. He said, "Vice is a monster." Okay, well, first of all, let me do this. Do you know what mean, M-I-E-N, means?
No.
Mean is a word meaning appearance.
Okay.
Okay, so this is what I would do in school. It's like, if I read this, you're going to just gloss over that. Teflon word's going to roll off you. So mean, M-I-E-N, is a word meaning appearance. Vice is a monster of so frightful mien as to be hated needs but to be seen. Yet seen too oft, familiar with her face, first we endure, then we pity, then we embrace. That's all you need to know about school.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. Yes, your son that you've trained right to be righteous, to be good, to be holy. Yes. When he first gets to school, he'll be like, oh. But after 12 years, that which he once was shocked at, he will be participating in. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't matter to you, then drop your kids off in the morning. I'm not going to have to answer for it. There's going to be 2 chairs in that room, my friend. Well, maybe 3 when you're talking about your kids. You, your wife, and Jesus. And you're not going to be able to lie to him. You're not going to be able to make excuses to him. You're not going to be able to convince him.
Right.
You're just going to be able to confess. And when he says, I gave you these kids, what'd you do for their education? Oh, yeah? Tell me about that teacher. Well, the state said he's okay. Who on the state said he was okay? Yeah. Well, the Board of Education. Who's on that board? I don't know. So you sent your kid to a stranger for education? Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff went on in that school? Oh, it was a really good school. It got an A rating. Yeah, what kind of stuff? What'd they do? They taught history. Yeah, who taught history? What's his background? What do you know about him? And these questions the Savior will just ask you with eye contact. And he knows the answer beforehand. He is our great advocate after all. And he will be like, with not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. It sounds like you guys are saying that a lot about your education. But it was so good. They got an A rating. And right, but you don't know anything about it. You took what I gave you. I mean, because I can imagine Jesus saying, let me ask you a question. If I'd given you a briefcase filled with $1 million, and I said, now, in order to keep this $1 million, you got to give it away to a stranger and let that stranger keep it for 8 hours. Would you do that? No, of course you wouldn't. Because why? Because I wouldn't want to lose the $1 million. And show them what they won, Johnny.
Right.
Because you lost your kids, man. I don't know why my kid does this. I do. I can tell you. Mm-hmm. And guess what, Mike? that was what it was designed to do.
Right. Again,
It's not, the education system isn't broken. It's working perfectly. It was literally designed. I can show you in his own words where Dewey said, I want to reduce the influence of Christianity on the next generation. To do that, we've got to extract them from Christian homes. But what's the benefit? Cui bono, who benefits? Mom with her side hustle?
Mm-hmm.
Mommy gets to have a job now, so we have 2 incomes, and we have an extra trip to Disneyland. We have an extra car. We have an extra 1,000 square feet. Right? Who benefits? I don't want my kid around all day. How am I supposed to watch my shows if my kid's around? I can't watch these shows.
And who benefits? Another person in the system. Another person who, as we talked about last time, who has daily participated in a sacrament of a pledge and in giving their allegiance to the state. A person who will, without thinking twice, sign a piece of paper at age 18 that will give himself to the government anytime there's a war. A person who will happily and gladly, pay his taxes like a good, like a good citizen.
And you know who supports all this, Mike? Look, I'm gonna pull the curtain away and reveal the wizard. Most of the teachers that I've ever known are really dumb. If there was a free market, you wouldn't hire them to teach your kids. Now, I can say that there are exceptions. People, and I'll mention names because they are remarkable exceptions. Spencer Bowers, James Russell. I can't remember his name. He taught at Heritage as well. He was a science magnificent. Anyway, there are exceptions, but most of the teachers, if there was a free market, you're not getting hired. And so they also want this system to be perpetuated because otherwise they have to get a real job, right? They have to get a real job. And so, because if you were left and you said, okay, I'm going to have to hire someone to teach math, and one of the applicants came in and said, yeah, I have a degree in education. What about math? I took a math class, okay, but I was taught how to teach. How to teach math? Well, I had a math class. I was taught how to be a classroom manager. How are you going to teach my kids math? Well, there's lots of good online resources. Well, I could do that, hon. Mm-hmm. Right? You wouldn't hire that person, but guess what? Oh, your local high school hired that person.
Right.
And paying that person $70,000 of your money.
That's
just the facts.
Yeah.
Right? A free market economy, man. Whoo. Most teachers I know would be out of a job in a free market economy. Grimm. Yeah. Dr. Grimm, that was his name.
Dr. Grimm.
What an amazing teacher.
Bless you, Dr. Grimm.
Yeah, what an amazing teacher he was. Yeah.
Well,
so,
it also,
and these people would be out of a job, so you want the system. So look and see who you got. You got the federal government who wants the system.
Mm-hmm.
You got the teachers who want the system. The faculty, the administration want the system. The parents want the system. And the kids want the system because why?
It's easy. It's not like it's...
If you say, yeah, it's easy. It's not hurting, and they get to hang around.
There's no growing up and you learn how to deal with bullies, I guess, but there's no actual adulting going on, and man, being a infant is easy.
Yeah, it's all around. But when I tell you, when you show them what it could be, those, most kids prefer education to school.
Yes.
But you have to show them that there is a difference. And that's the thing, my first day teaching, I always tell the kids, I hate school as much as you. And I say, because this ain't school. School is a Greek word that means leisure. Relax, man. Just quit asking me questions about what date this happened and how do you spell Washington and is this going to be on a test. My kids, when they got used to me and there was a new kid that came into school and that kid said, is this going to be on the test? The other kids would all go, ooh, you've done poked the bear now.
Yeah.
It's going to be on a test. The test is called life.
Right. And this is the other thing that and I wish I could remember his name. It's another educator scientist, and he ran a study. It was a TED Talk I watched, but so sometimes these things just ring true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they just ring true.
Mm-hmm.
And he took a computer and just set it out, like just set it in a classroom. And the kids naturally went over to the computer, figured out how to turn it on. And he said within, a few weeks, they were teaching other kids how to use the computer. And he ran this experiment in third world nations. He ran this experiment in every place. And my point is, we're natural learners. Like that is what we naturally want to figure stuff out. How do things work? And we're also natural teachers. We want to share with others the things we have discovered. These are things that come as natural as breathing, and yet it's taken out of us.
Yeah, I have students that it's been, 10 years since I've had, not quite 10, but maybe 8 years since I've had them as a student. They're like, hey, can you send me that quotation that we used?
Right.
Because it applies to life, man. They're not having a test. They're not texting me to get the answers to a test.
Yeah.
They're like, send me that quotation because I really, really liked it. And it applies to my life right now. And I want to share it with somebody.
And what are you like? As a parent, and as a parent that I have older kids, and I understand, like I feel the anxiety. Like you want your kids to be self-sufficient. You want your kids to be able to get a job and take care of themselves and all these things. But having kind of seen the things that are happening, even more so today than ever before, I think about like, what would I rather have my kid know and be as an adult? Would I rather them be stuck in a job that they hate, that they never even thought of doing, that they and are in a bunch of debt because they went to college,
right,
and are basically have thrown themselves from day one into a rat race that they can never get out of? Or would I rather them have read Shakespeare, learn how to be happy, find out a passion in their life, and let God fight their battles?
Mm-hmm.
And as painful and as not painful, that's the wrong word, as difficult as it is to have faith that God will protect and take care of, that they're his kids too.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like, you got to get over that, man, because school's not going to teach your kid how to be happy.
No. And I remember having a discussion with some kids my first year teaching high school. Well, teaching it, recently, and I guess 14 or whatever. Which do you think, and I would ask them, which do you think is more important to know? When the Declaration of Independence was signed, or why?
Yeah. what they say. I mean, for sure, it's why.
Yeah, of course. Who cares when?
Right. It was yesterday.
It doesn't change the
You
fact.
signed it yesterday.
If it was yesterday, it doesn't matter. If you know why it was signed, that you could change the world. Knowing that it was July 4th, 1776, you'll pick that up. You can pick that up anywhere. You can watch History Channel. You can go to Google, Wikipedia. You'll pick that up. You won't get why, but why will change. Why will change your life, and it could change the whole world. I remember also, I would show a video. There was a video game series, and I can't remember what it was called. Assassin's Creed. It just came to me.
Okay.
And they had a Bunker Hill. So when we would discuss the Battle of Bunker Hill, I would open that discussion with showing them the Assassin's Creed video. And they were like, "Why are you showing this?" And I'm like, "What do you notice?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you notice about this? And one of the things I'm like, you see how those guys, because they accurately portray it, just wave after wave after wave of British soldiers. And these guys do not run. Joseph Warren was killed because you don't run. Why did... Who cares who won the bloody battle? Who cares? Who cares what date it was fought on? That doesn't change anything. But you ask why a dairy farmer stood there as wave after wave after wave of British soldier just pounding them. Why didn't they run?
That's the question, right?
There you go.
That's the question. That why did Hugh Mercer do the things that he did?
That's
why
your
did
boy,
he die?
Hugh Mercer.
That is my boy.
Yeah, that's your boy. and a good boy to have. He's a stud for sure.
He is a stud. But
Why did they do it? Why did they not run? And why do we? Why do they not run? One of my friends asked today, he texted me. He's like, when is it going to set off? When are we going to set this off? Never. Because we were all raised on the plantation. There isn't a human being alive today who knows freedom. Why did our fathers not run? Because they knew freedom and they saw it being taken from them.
Right.
Well, none of us grew up free. And even when we see little liberties being attacked, we just shake our fists or we write a little article. We don't try to fire people up and say, let's light this candle.
Right.
So, I remember, and the same sort of reaction that you had is when I say to them, why didn't that guy run? Why is he standing there?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Why is this, leathersmith from Cambridge, Massachusetts, why is he standing there? Why isn't he just throwing that squirrel gun down and running for his life and going back to his family? Tell you one thing, if he'd have done that, his wife would have forced him back out the door. Right?
It's true.
What's that thing? Molly Stark sleeps a widow tonight.
Yeah.
Don't embarrass me, man. But why? Because we don't know liberty.
And
it has no value to us.
And I think that's why the work that you do and the it's that great saying, I think, oh my gosh. Is it Sydney? Yeah, Sydney. About those hidden because it, and that, by the way, that's why the homeschool community is so important, because you're not going to get liberty out of prison.
Well, who? Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
the warden's not going to set the prisoners free,
right.
and he's not going to allow them to be taught why and how to escape the prison.
Exactly. And
so they're never going to get taught. And that's the thing. You know how many times I got in trouble by administration? They're like, the kids, they don't understand these principles. Oh, they do.
No,
and you hate that they do.
Yeah, you hate that they do because yeah, that's exactly right.
They do understand, and it bothers you because you know that you're working for the tyrant and they're fixing to tear your playhouse down.
And I'm all there for it.
Yeah, and I'm here for it. Not only that, but I'm telling them to do it. Well, you can't tell them to do that. I'm not. I'm allowing everyone in history to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Principia obstis, baby. The moment you see that, rip it out of the ground. The moment you see the weed of tyranny, rip it up.
Right. And now that weed has grown into a root deep and thick, and again that goes back to why I think it's really important that we that these homeschool communities.
Can I read that thing from Sydney? We often refer to it.
In fact, I think that would be a great place to end. Why don't you read that wonderful quote,
Brother Sydney,
and give us that inspiration of, the importance. I'm going to pronounce that properly. The importance, of maintaining liberty through a true education, which cannot be found in the public schools.
Right. So this is Sydney from his Discourses Concerning Government. He's speaking of the last king of Rome, the tyrant Tarquin. While he reigned, Brutus, Valerius, Horatius, Herminius, Larsius, and Coriolanus all lay hid and unregarded. But when they came to fight for themselves and to employ their valor for the good of their country, they gave such testimonies of bravery as have been admired by all succeeding ages. And they settled such a discipline as produced others like them, or more excellent than they, as long as liberty lasted. There's a lot in that, Mike. Hid and unregarded. But when they got old enough and were able to fight for themselves, they gave such testimonies of bravery as have been admired by all succeeding ages.
So say we all. May that be the case.
Well, I'll tell you, the phrase that pays, settled such a discipline. Discipline your minds. Mm-hmm. Become a Brutus. Become a Coriolanus. Keep your kids hid and unregarded from the eyes of the Tarquins of the world. Teach them to love their country. Teach them true principles so that when they come of age, they will give testimonies of bravery as will be talked about by all succeeding ages.
Joe Wolverton, thanks for being on the show, man.
Thank you.
You're listening to And If Love Remains.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. We're trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.